How can you put as much time as one does into Smash without feeling some sense of pride about it? The answer for the most part is that you can't. To some degree, almost all of us have some sense of self-worth attached to the game, which means at some point, we're just going to have to deal with losing. And losing feels awful because it undermines our sense of progress and it makes us feel like frauds. So, how exactly do you balance being confident in yourself and your skills while also not wanting to throw yourself into a pit of hot tar whenever you lose? That is, accepting loss in a healthy way that, while maybe still a little painful, losing never feels good, doesn't negatively reflect on your sense of self-worth quite so much. In my last video about progress, plateaus, perspectives, and things like that, I made the point that most of us picture getting better at the game as climbing a mountain or a ladder, where we make these definite strides and that all the benchmarks of progress you meet along the way are rigidly ordered in the sense that once you hit the next rung of the ladder, you're just simply beyond all matters beneath that rung. For instance, if you perceive that you've leveled up a bit but then lose to someone you thought you were beyond losing to, you assume you failed utterly and that you've learned nothing. When progress is viewed as a ladder, then yeah, any form of unexpected failure is going to undermine everything you thought about yourself or think you thought about yourself, everything you think you've accomplished, and you're going to feel like you've gotten absolutely nowhere. Viewed in this way, success and failure are completely incompatible and create a lot of cognitive dissonance about our perceived skill level. If you watched my last video, then you probably won't be surprised when I say that this latter view of progress and skill is fundamentally wrong, and that a more accurate and healthier way to view your progress as a player, as well as allow meaningful progress and unexpected failure to coexist peacefully rather than one strictly excluding the other, is sort of a landscape. Skill and progression don't just have rigid direction and order like a straight line, but also a sort of topography, peaks, valleys, curvature, and contour. When progress is modeled like a ladder or a straight line, your only frames of reference are specific benchmarks of success or failure, which puts you in a cycle of extreme highs and extreme lows, such that you've either climbed a rung higher or gotten knocked down a rung lower. This one-dimensional view ignores the reality that the totality of who we are as players is made up of tons of variables, specific points of information we look out for, our mood, and things like that. These variables all come together to form not single points on a line, but points on a plane. This is what I mean by skill being topographic and having a sort of texture or contour to it. Our relative skill levels can be thought of just as that. Levels, each with slight dips and peaks, whose slight fluctuations can be the inflection point between either a pride-making win or a pride-breaking loss. With this in mind, you can maybe start to see how a loss doesn't necessarily contravene your perception that you've made progress or improved as a player, and doesn't automatically indicate total failure or that you've gone backwards. Like I said, slight adjustments to one parameter, be it your amount of sleep, over-caffeination, which funnily enough has been a problem for me in the past since I take being 6'3" and over 200 pounds for granted and think I can drink more caffeine than I actually can and end up feeling like I'm going to have a heart attack in the middle of a set. Your point of focus in the match, that is something you explicitly watch out for, all these things can have surprisingly large consequences. Generally speaking, your skill level is determined by the relative plane you're on, not by the single point you're occupying on a given day on that plane, which is why even players like Leo lose on occasion. Sometimes your very best won't be good enough, and as a matter of fact, there is no best that is always good enough. Some bests, like Leo's, Samsora's, or whatever, are just good enough more often. We average these so-called variables as best we can, but we can't account for everything. We can only try to account for the greatest amount of variables and information with limited resources, and this creates a complicated, if not impossible, optimization problem where tweaking one parameter necessarily means tugging at another one in the opposite direction. Like I've also mentioned in the past, the kinds of information we frame and pay attention to affect how effective we are, and this can change from opponent to opponent, from day to day. This is why coin flip matchups can happen even at top levels of play. A top player loses to another because one of their parameters, so to speak, is adjusted in one direction, they lose, account for that new variable, adjust that variable, and are able to beat the person they lost to next time, and vice versa, which may affect their overall dynamic against other people as well, and this creates a cycle. Key takeaway amid all these abstract analogies is this. You're going to take bad L's, and that fact is mostly beyond your immediate control. That isn't to say that you're not at fault for your losses, but rather in the spirit of the fact that, like I mentioned, there is no best that's always good enough. It's not worth flogging yourself and laying the inspirational picture of your favorite player face down on your desk and lamenting that you failed them. In other words, what sense is there in regretting something that was bound to happen at some point? Our job as competitors is to take as much of ourselves under control as we can, but this is an issue of optimization, not perfection. Now, I don't know what it is with me and these physics and math analogies lately, but an analogy that might help tie all this together is the double slit experiment, where electrons, being random at the micro level and deterministic at the macro level, are fired at a screen. Though individual electron positions are random, the same pattern always emerges. This reflects the idea that competitive accountability and inevitability can coexist. You have control over which relative skill plane you're on, but functionally random fluctuations mostly beyond our control can put us at better or worse parts on that plane and make sort of unexpected things happen. Anyway, I think I've talked long enough at this point, and as usual risk just confusing you, so I'll call it a day there. In the beginning, I said that losing will pretty much always sting, but there are times when it haunts us, and that should ideally rarely be the case. I think being haunted by a loss is the product of not acknowledging the fact that reaching certain milestones in our development as players doesn't immunize us against mistakes that are uncharacteristic of our perceived skill levels. Once you see where you are as a point on a plane rather than a rung on a ladder, it becomes a little easier at least to accept what everyone says but have a hard time fully appreciating, which we hopefully see now isn't just a comforting platitude but a statistical truth. You can't win them all.